make sure to give my dad a 5-star review.
Make sure to like and subscribe to his YouTube. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
Went through the entire process, got approved, did all, everything they needed to do, and the president, before the event, wrote a letter to the entire campus, every single student, faculty, and staff, citing multiple times his biblical views and his religious views on why he was canceling this event, without any other reason. Like, they had full approval with everything else.
Hey, welcome back, Faithful Politics listeners and watchers. If you're watching us on our YouTube channel, we are so glad to have you. And if you are just listening to us and you've never seen our YouTube channel, we don't say this enough. We have a YouTube channel. And that's all I'll say about that. Make sure you check it out. Yes. I'm your political host, Will Wright, joined by my ever faithful work wife, Pastor Josh Bertram. How's it going, Josh?
Doing great. Thanks, Will.
And today we have with us Kevin Bolling. He is the executive director of the Secular Student Alliance, which is the only national nonprofit supporting atheist, humanist, and non-theist students. So we see you out there. And since 2017, he's guided the group through some pretty major cultural and political shifts and strengthening its campus presence and advocacy for church-state separation, LGBTQ rights, and inclusive student leadership. And we are just so glad to have him with us today. Welcome to the show, Kevin.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate being here to talk with you guys today.
Yeah, so let's just jump right in and kind of learn a little bit more about you. So you grew up in a Catholic and military family. Based on what I understand, you moved between the U.S., Puerto Rico, Spain, and I got to ask, like how did your early experience kind of shape what you do today? Because it seems like quite the journey.
It was interesting childhood growing up, and so there are a good number of us who are grew up in military families. My father was in the Navy, so Navy brat through and through, and so there's always, I think, an interesting perspective that one gets, especially growing up as a child in a military family, that not only moves around the U.S., but also, while Puerto Rico is still the U.S., but also, into Europe and being in Spain. And so seeing different perspectives and moving, so you're in constantly new communities and, seeing different perspectives that way. At the same time, growing up rather religious, my family was Roman Catholic. I was an altar boy for years. My mother was heavily involved in the church. She was on the liturgy committee and she baked the communion bread. She was on the committee that chose the wine. I think it had nothing to do with religious things there. I think she just enjoyed the wine drinking. But my family was, my grandparents went to church, for as long as I can remember, as they retired, went to church every day. So largely religious family, and then of course the military perspective. But I do think it's, I think growing up military in the religious community, the strong commitment to the religion and being involved definitely gave me perspectives in moving forward, and then values development and how those things took place. But I do think in this particular question, growing up in the military and that youth, and especially I think being outside of the U.S. gives you a different paradigm on the information that that we are bombarded with on a regular basis, and just the appreciation for different cultures, different people, different communities. My brother and I were very privileged in the fact that when we lived in Spain for 4 years, and for me that was most of high school, which are, I think, very fundamental values, perspective, creating years for young people. We traveled a lot, so being able to go up into Scandinavia and see countries that largely aren't religiously based, or where religion isn't, embedded into the society, and going into Africa, and seeing a completely different culture, whether that's Morocco or other places. And so being able to see that and experience that, I think, opened my worldview, and took myself out of, I think, somewhat of a narrow and limiting space that in the U.S. that with the information that we're fed through media and culture and society, gave me a chance to be able to see that in a different perspective. And when things were happening, realizing that there are other perspectives and starting to question just what would see just in the United States.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. When you travel to different places, there's something about meeting people and seeing that other people are living life differently that makes you just like it's startling, I guess, because you have your own way of doing things, you have your own way of living, and that's working for you, so most of the time, I guess. And then you go and you see someone else and you're like, wow, like there's a whole another way of existing and of living. And it seems like they're happy. And it confronts you with all sorts of questions, that you have to wrestle through. And one thing that I would love to talk to you about is kind of the story of when you came out in grad school,
Mhm.
and kind of talk about like how did that experience shape you, and what was it like being from a Catholic and military background? I imagine that could have been added complications or complexities to it. And yeah, so how did it shift your religion? Did it your view of authority, things like that? I'd love for you to dig into that a little bit.
No, great question. Happy to. I think for anyone coming out is a progression, of sort of realizing it yourself, being comfortable with yourself, starting to tell other people. So I think that the emphasis that did for me was in grad school and starting to do that publicly, and sort of living my authentic self, and being comfortable in that skin. But clearly, I think I was also a bit fortunate that in my family, it's sort of each generation there is someone who is gay, and so while growing up, uh, it wasn't something that was really talked about, but there was, I think, a subconscious thing in there going, okay, my family is accepting of this. There is a normality in this for my family. So I do think that was subconsciously opened that door a little bit more for me and made my journey a little bit easier. But clearly, the Catholic Church, at that time, was, well, I mean, still isn't, but much friendlier now, but was not friendly to LGBT folk, and really that time was gay and lesbian people. It was very anti-gay in their rhetoric, and their policies, and in their theology. I do think we've gotten better, but not anywhere that we need to be, especially with the Catholic Church. So I do remember my conversation, coming out to my aunt who is gay, and I was, she's like, oh, which is like, we've been waiting for you. I was like, well, and I was like, so, talking about my mom and my dad, I was like, and she was like, do you see a problem in that? I said, no. I said, I think they know who I am, and my father being in the military, I didn't think that was going to be a problem for him. And I was unfortunate on both those, but my aunt did ask the question. She was like, well, what about, growing up Catholic? And I said, well, and I think even at that time I was like, well, if there is a God, the God's going to love me because God made me this way. And if not, I'm okay with that. Like, I don't need the church's acceptance to know who I am. And so it was an okay time for me to go, if the church isn't going to accept me, then I'm okay with, this isn't the right place for me to be. And I went through Episcopal Church, which was, much more opening and advocates and welcoming. So through my journey with religion before becoming, non-religious, and I think even my exploration of the Episcopal Church, I was already non-religious at that point. I just enjoyed the community and sort of those messages about doing good, and being there for other people, and the activism that was taking place in that as well. And I think on the sort of the flip side with the military aspect, where we still, I think, I want to say this probably before Bill Clinton, even with, Don't Ask, Don't Tell, or maybe it was around that time. So the military was obviously not fond of people being gay. I do remember that when we lived in Spain, our neighbors who happened to be we lived off the base for a while, happened to be two gay couples that, wasn't talked about, but you knew it was there. And so they were also in the military. And so, but there was also, I think, it was a time when the military was really trying intentionally to look at all the different people from different backgrounds who are involved in the military and having that be a positive thing. And having that being a strength, and having these cultural differences and difference in perspectives and differences in people. And that was a lot around, I think, that time about race. But you definitely felt that of bringing, different people together, and that was seen as a positive. Where in today's military, I'm not sure that same feeling exists. And I think that, in looking from a military perspective, I think that's a bad thing, not a good thing, and that weakens our military, not strengthens our military. So coming out to my parents, my dad said, he was like, my family comes first, so I support you first. So, and then religion's down the line, sort of later on. So it was, I think, a very easy thing for my father, even from the military religious background, of being, no, family's number one, and that's just important.
That's really, really awesome. I love that. I love that story, because I think most people probably listening or watching this were expecting a different outcome at the very end. You really had us in suspense. We're like, but what did his father say? And it's great. Like I love that, and I think we should have more of that in our society. But that kind of brings us up to today. So now you are the executive director of the hold on, I'm going to SSA, as I had it abbreviated, but I wrote it down to Secular Student Alliance. Excuse me. So tell us a little bit about the group. What are you all trying to accomplish? But then maybe before you answer that, just define sort of like what's the work Secular is doing, kind of in that title.
Sure, and I think secular, sort of at its purest form, is largely the separation of church and state in our society. And so, I'm just super generalizing that there. But when we look at, when the organization was started, there were other, the American Atheists, the American Humanist Association, Free Thinkers Organization, Skeptic organizations. And so in the students who wanted to start this organization and started the organization really chose secular as a more inclusive word. So where young people, no matter where they were, whether they were questioning or whether they were still religious, whether they were, what we call firebrand, atheists, or those sort of soft humanists, however you want to, look at those different paradigms, everyone would feel included. And so we do have, while we are a national educational nonprofit, and the heart and soul of what we do is student chapters all across the country. So mostly college, universities, high schools. We've been in middle schools, have partnership with elementary schools, more homeschooling, virtual students now. So as our societies become a little bit more complicated, and post-COVID, we're just making sure wherever students are, we want to be there for them. But we do have religious students as well. And who are members of our organization. So they may be highly passionate about church-state separation and religious liberty, and so that's their calling. And sometimes we find that religious students are involved just because they want to have some philosophical conversations about their own religion, and their religious community isn't always a safe place to do that. And so that's not whether they're like questioning and I'm going to leave. It's just, I want to actually talk about this and have some questions that may push back on some of the teachings. And our students tend to be fairly knowledgeable about religion. Oftentimes in deconversion, you sort of do a deep dive in what does all this mean and what are the stories and what are the beliefs. And so oftentimes they'll go, okay, yeah, you want to debate? You want to talk about this? What side do you want? I'll take the other. And so a lot of our student chapters have partnerships with religious student organizations on campuses and do interfaith work and do those sorts of things. So, while our primary source is supporting non-religious students, and almost 50% of youth now don't identify with a particular religion, and that's obviously growing in the United States. And that doesn't mean they're all non-religious. So they may be spiritual or religious, but not, but don't want to be associated with a particular religious organization or institution. But we're finding more and more are atheist, agnostic in that realm and actually leaving religion. The interesting thing is as sort of this is happening, so we have more students sort of leaving religion or becoming non-religious or being in that realm. The animus against non-religious people in the U.S., current administration, political society sort of things, is actually increasing. So we're seeing more in animus and more harassment towards non-religious folks. And that obviously impacts youth and young people very differently than it does adults who are established or in their communities and those sort of things.
And did I hear you correctly that you said that animus towards non-religious is on the rise towards non-religious students? Is that what you were saying?
It definitely is. So,
Gotcha.
so yeah, and there are lots of national statistics that show that, and still in our society, if you look at sort of the most mistrusted or aligned populations in our society, it's Muslims in this U.S. Muslims, trans folk, and non-religious.
Gotcha. So that's interesting. So, I'm like thinking through the core like issues that like your story is even bringing out in my mind, and even like the mission of the organization. And it feels like part of this is like who gets to form and shape the conscience of anyone, right? The idea that the individual, is it the individual? Is it the institution? Is it just the family? What is the tension between the institutions and the individual with forming your conscience, right? Because and I want to be sensitive here because I don't mean any of this in a negative way.
Oh, no, you're good.
Potentially, but like I think about someone with, say, maybe like with a part of their personality or something that is harmful or whatever it is, or the society wouldn't want that, right? We want certain things to be shaping, the institutions to be shaping someone's conscience and their morality in that way, meaning we don't have just limitless, like unlimited freedom for the individual to shape their own conscience and morality, because we have to live in a pluralistic society, right? So we have to have some limits on that by the institutions that we have. And I guess the question that I have, like, for you on this one is like, what do you think the tension is there between the individual and the institution in terms of like the shaping of someone's conscience and the shaping of what it means to really participate in society in a healthy way?
Yeah. And I think, if you look at globally, if you look and there's lots of, obviously religious values, different types of governments, different societal living, socioeconomic, there's so many different factors that come into play. But really our values as human beings, for the vast majority, aren't that different. So, and that doesn't matter whether you're non-religious or Buddhist or, a different Asian religion or, an African religion, the U.S. Catholic, one of the predominant religions. There's a universal sort of, morals and values that we all sort of abide by. And I think I'm pulling this from many other people. I did not make this up, but like, if murder, if I have murdered just as many people as I want, which is zero. I have no desire to murder people. So, our values and morals, I think, are more formed by our society and our family. And then there is, education and master's in education, and so during college time, that traditional years happens to be also when human development wise, we're forming those values that we're going to keep the rest of our lives. So we examine all the things that we were brought up with, our family values, our societal values, things that we've experienced, and we make determinations usually about this point in our study, which ones we're going to keep and which ones we're not, and and those tend to be the ones we keep for the rest of our lives. That's why I always say Coke and Pepsi, want you to drink Coke and Pepsi in college, because odds are you're drinking that the rest of your life. It's this magical little time in human development. It just happens to be that takes place. So, but I think if, there's an assumption, a default that religion is always the good, and religious teaches us good moral and values, where we can pull out the Bible, things that are happening today, things that have happened in the past. There are lots and lots of examples where religion has not been good. Religion did not have values that we would accept today, and has done some pretty horrible things that we don't want people to abide by and use as lessons in moving forward. So I do think it's more of a societal impact, and I do think that's more the familial impact. And I do think people use their values to develop religion, not the other way around.
That's good. I don't know if you've got students in Louisiana, Texas, or Oklahoma, and
Yes.
you probably know what I'm going to be asking next. Is I'm curious on how are your students handling this influx of things into the classroom, such as Ten Commandments, and the whole flurry of other stuff that seemingly is diminishing that wall of separation between church and state.
I think we've no matter who you are, you have seen the assault on the wall of separation between church and state, religion and government. Florida and Texas have obviously been testing grounds and breeding grounds for that. And the funny thing you mentioned is Texas right now. I think most of our chapters right now are in Texas. If you look at per capita per state, we have the highest concentration in Texas, and they're all very, very, very active. And so our students, they look at one. I think for us, it's our students coming together. It's a safe place for them to be non-religious. Some students still feel like I'm the only one on campus, and they realize once getting involved, oh my gosh, there's all the other students. And so it's okay, now what are you going to do? And so for our students, in Texas, when the Supreme Court took down Roe v. Wade, our students in San Antonio were and they got together with coalition with other students, and we're okay, well, we have a health center on campus that's supposed to be providing accurate, fact-based information on sex ed and reproductive health for students. That is their job. And so they, had a rally on campus that they wanted the health center on campus to still provide service to students. They weren't very successful in that. So they were fine. So they went and using their student organization status, went and found nonprofits in the local community to come onto campus. And so they host safe and education fairs on campus, to where they have people coming in talking about the correct information and scientifically based information, accurate based information about sex ed, so students have that information if they want to add questions. For LGBT students, bringing in those resources. They work with another nonprofit and hand out free Plan B on campus, because the health center is not providing, and condoms and dental dams and lube, because the health center has reduced those services or stopped some of those services. So they're making sure that their fellow students have, and working with, in coalition with other groups, have access to those sorts of things. So our students have done that. We had Hightower High School in the Houston area in Texas. Their school board was deciding on anti-LGBT policies. And so we had high school sophomores going and testifying, which for
Wow.
many adults don't want to do that, but they were like, no, this is important. This is my fellow students. And so they're standing up more and more and more for their fellow students and doing those sorts of things. So, multiple students alumni testifying at the school board meeting. On the other side of Texas, West Texas A&M out there, Amarillo, it's way out there. The school's in Canyon. It's basically, a stop sign, two traffic lights, and that's about it. But our student officers of the Secular Student Alliance were also involved in the Spectrum, which was their LGBT group on campus, and they were doing an event, a drag show on campus, and it was also happened to be a fundraiser for the Trevor Project, which LGBT suicide hotline it's not just U.S. It's it's a large super network and valuable services. The president, so they went through the entire process, got approved, did all everything they needed to do, and the president before the event wrote a letter to the entire campus, every single student, faculty, and staff, citing multiple times his biblical views and his religious views on why he was canceling this event without any other reason. Like, they had full approval with everything else. So our students sued, and it was actually, was it Monday? It was, I think, 5 days ago that the Fifth Circuit Supreme Court, which is not a circuit court that would be favorable, but ruled in favor of the students and said, no, this is their free speech, this is their right, their freedom to assemble, and reversed the drag ban on campus as one of the things that they were petitioning for as part of the lawsuit. So our students are being super active. They're being out there and making sure that their voice is being heard, and that's one of the things that I love about working with the organization is the students very much understand the intersection between separation of church and state and social justice issues about LGBT rights, women's reproductive justice, women's equality, voting access. Environment, climate change, racial justice, like they completely understand the intersection of these and how important they all are and how they work together.
I think that's really, really awesome. And I'm a bit jealous that I wasn't as active when I was in high school or college. I had bigger things to do, like stay up late. But I'm curious though, like as I'm hearing you talk and I appreciate all the stuff that the students are doing. I think more people, younger people should be more active in their community, their society, what have you. And I remember like when we talked to Tim Alberta about his book, and at the very end, we had asked him, like, what is it that brings you hope? And he mentioned the youth. And at first, like, it took me a minute. I'm like, really? Like, have you met the youth? But of course, like, he has, right? And he's just like, yeah, just the things that people are doing to kind of like stand up for democracy. It's just really, really inspiring to him. And so what I'm curious is, everything that you talked about seems like to be something that I would fully support. I could get behind. If I were a student, I'd want to be a part of whatever you're doing. But then also, like, we live in this, or at least our podcast, talks about, or we explore ways that the Christian right is using sort of certain mechanisms to mobilize to, TPUSA, is on college campuses as well. So like, how do you sort of like confront or reconcile, like the work and the activism you all are doing, and sort of like compare it to like what TPUSA is doing?
TPUSA has obviously strong connections to the Republican Party, and that organizationally they have become much more alt-right in their programmatic work, their language, those sorts of things. And I think really for us, they embody a white Christian nationalist organization now. And unfortunately, they're well-funded and their reach is fairly strong on campuses. But I think, we are not, we're not the opposite to that. So we are we're something else that's our mission is obviously very different and our focus is very different. And one, providing that place for non-religious students to come together, and then also to share out their activism. But when our students are constantly looking at and sort of the attacks of the alt-right religious community now as you sort of mentioned, pushing the Ten Commandments, into classrooms. Some of the crazy stuff that's happening now, the patriotic mission coming out of Oklahoma, which, I mean, is white Christian nationalism rebranded. All the aspects of sort of broadening, quote unquote, student rights, if you look at the heart of every one of the vast majority of those laws, and it's really privileging a certain segment of Christianity over everyone else. Parental rights, for parents being able to use their religious values, and again, the cases and the people who are backing them, this is all a very narrow conservative brand of Christianity to be able to take away other people's learning and rights. So it's this repetitive, it's very planned. They've been working on this for decades. Project 2025 was the blueprint of what they were going to do when Trump became into office. And I think they're up to over 50% of the things they've already implemented already, even though, he claims that he had no idea what that was. So it's well funded. It is fairly well organized, and they continue to push this. I think the important part of it, though, is it's not just for the non-religious community to be standing up this, or for non-religious students, and because we work in coalition with lots of organizations in the secular movement, the non-religious movement, but also in religious communities. So when in Texas, when they were pushing to not have trained guidance counselors and mental health counselors in schools, but putting in chaplains without any training, there were over 100 religious chaplains and ministers and priests in Texas that were like, no, this is a bad idea.
Yeah.
So it's working also in there's Christians Against Christian nationalism. The Joint Baptist Committee is actually doing things, against Christian nationalism. So there are lots of inherent dangers for religious communities to be supporting white Christian nationalism.
Yeah. So your organization has also been very vocal about supporting LGBTQ rights, which I mean, to me, I think it's probably one of the most pressing issues in the country right now. But and a lot of states are also passing laws or trying to pass laws, citing religious freedom as a way to restrict rights, whether that's like for marriage or for a whole host of other things. So how is your organization kind of navigating that tension at the local level between, protecting the religious liberty? And to your point, you said, hey, we're a secular organization, but we have plenty of people that span the spectrum of beliefs. So how do you navigate or reconcile that tension between religious liberty and defending students against this religiously motivated discrimination, essentially? I don't know how else to put it.
Yeah. And I think and talking about religious freedom, we all have, and one of the beautiful things about the United States is we have the right to, the freedom of religion. That also includes the freedom from religion. We don't have to be religious. And we often look at it I will fully support your right to practice your religion privately and personally. That stops when you start forcing other people to do it, no matter what it is, which religion it is. We often see that in the, conservative Christian, movements and organizations in the United States, backed by strong legal organizations who are also in that same vein. So for us, it's not so much we respect your right to believe what you want, but you don't, especially as a politician, you don't get to use your religious beliefs to change laws that impact people based on your religion. And there are multiple examples, people standing up in the U.S. Capitol as well as capitals across the states, in specifically citing their religious views as the reason why they are trying to take away LGBTQ rights. And I mean, for us, if you don't have the religious, I want to be able to discriminate based on my religion against LGBTQ people, there really isn't another reason that people want to do it. Like, religion is unfortunately being used as a discriminatory, mechanism against the LGBT community. And we just think that's inherently wrong on the aspect of imposing your religion on other people, as well as just civil rights in general in the United States.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely understand the argument and understand, like the tension that's there when you think about these, like someone's deeply held beliefs, whatever they are, and then you get a category of people that comes to Christianity, where again, and then it gets very complex even within Christianity, because you have you can call them kinds of Christianity or whatever they are, and their beliefs. And I don't know how different it is than any kind of, category of people that come together and then they start to disagree, or factions start to, arise. I think it happens in most areas. And I guess what I'm trying to wrestle with, and what I'm trying to wonder about is where is the core of the tension that we're facing when we're thinking about religion and the way that it influences the public sphere, and that's always like my biggest question is what is the common ground that we have? Because we have to have some common ground with each other, right? I'm conservative. I have conservative views on just about most things. I mean, I'm willing to look at every single one of my views. I actually am doing that currently, and trying to get more than just be like, hey, I'm conservative, therefore you can pigeonhole me into any number of views that you think I might have, which I may or may not, or I may or may not be totally sold on. You know what I mean? Like, I could be open to evidence, and as a matter of fact, I am. And I'm trying to understand, what is the core, so if my religion to me is that is core to who I am, right? It's a huge part of my identity. It's, I don't know how much it's chosen on my part. I choose to go to church, I guess, right? I choose to read the Bible, or choose any number of things, but I don't know how much it's chosen, in the sense that I have a very deeply held belief that I can't just turn on and off just like anyone else, right? And so what is the core tension that we're dealing with here in I don't know. I feel like that question doesn't make sense, but I'm trying to really grasp at it. Go ahead. I
think just a side note beforehand, the largest predictor of what religion you will be is where you're born in the world. So if you were born if you were born in the U.S., you're most likely to be Christian. So it was chosen for you, in essence, because of where you were born. Side note, but I think the interesting thing taking place, and again, this has been decades in motion, and planned to, I think for this, we're seeing it at this moment, the culmination of it. But interesting that you would use tension, because I do think if you look at what the current administration is doing, and more importantly, the White Christian National, Heritage Foundation, and I mean, they are as far right as you can get, and want a theocracy, which is completely, void of what this nation was started on, our founding principles. But they want a theocracy in the country, and that's what they're pushing for. And it's white Christian nationalism. They don't. If you look at Project 2025, it is about, especially looking at college and who gets scholarships. It's rich, white, straight men. And it's who are we taking programs away from? It's the LGBT community, it's women, it's communities of color, people with disabilities. So, I mean, and that's core, that runs core through it. But I do think that if you look at some of the look at LGBT folk, most religious communities overwhelmingly support LGBT rights and support same-sex marriage, which multiple and again it's small. It's not small. It's large, far-right legal organizations. It's working in coalition with far-right members of the Republican Party to push laws and court cases to the Supreme Court to undo same-sex marriage now. While most Americans, religious or not, don't support that. So I do think there is a tension when we look at even with, how many people really want the 10 commandments in our classrooms. I think most Christians don't want that. How many want untrained chaplains doing the work of guidance counselors and mental health professionals? Most people don't want that. So if you look at, if people really understand the vouchers, it's not about, it's not about freedom of choice. It's about undoing public education. And is why looking at Texas, while every rural legislator fought against it until they were out-primaried by their own party to get people in who would finally vote for it. It took them years because people didn't want that because they understand the damage that's going to do to our society. So that's religious communities as well. So I do think the tension, is the majority of Americans not supporting what's currently happening in our society. And even though a good number of people voted because of immigration, the numbers now do not support the just draconian, immoral things that we're doing with immigration now. And in Los Angeles, the whole thing that started here because of immigration and bringing in the federal troops was because they were having graduations and they were going in and grabbing grandmothers out of the stands. I mean, it was the most heartless, gutless things that you could do. People who were going in, had their appointment in the process of the immigration process, standing outside the doors and getting them, so they couldn't go in for their appointment. They were trying to follow the law. So it's just how gutless it was. And I think majority of people, when they understand what's happening, they don't agree. And to me, that's the tension that's currently taking place. We have a government in place which the vast majority of people on moral, ethical, foundational grounds, principles of our society don't agree with what's happening.
Yeah, it's sad. It's not even just Los Angeles. So I was born in California. My mom still lives in Southern California. She lives up in the high desert. Props to Hesperia for my Hesperia audience. But she was saying yesterday that, there's like a ton of like Border Patrol ICE agents around. Like, and if anybody knows anything about Hesperia or the high desert in general, you're like, what? Like, that doesn't really make sense. But yeah, they're everywhere. And I think it's concerning. But I do want to just kind of get into the weeds a little bit, just about the nuts and bolts of the operation and like how is it ran? Because I mean, Josh and I run this podcast just between him and I, and it's a lot of work. I couldn't imagine having like this like nationwide student alliance. So like, walk us through some of the logistics. Like, how do you all like decide, what I guess it wouldn't really be a curriculum, but like what the talking points or whatever would be the study materials or whatever you use?
Structurally, we have the national office, so we have, national staff, and we're a very small team who really provide support for our student chapters, and so they're the heart of what we do. And so, whether a student is starting a chapter or it's been an ongoing long chapter, there's lots of free services that we provide to them. So posters, flyering, business cards, banners, tabling supplies, so that they can make students aware that they're on campus, that students know that they're there if they want to join. and at a basic principle of just normalizing non-religion, like, there are often times where we don't have to go through our society if we're religious to think that there are non-religious people. So just opening that door, just, oh yeah, there's non-religious people as well, and that's okay. But then it's about we have, grants that we will do for programs that they want to do on campus. So they're obviously doing probably, lectures and panels with their group, having philosophical conversation with their group, but doing things for the larger campus. It's educational things. It's sponsoring a professor who's going to talk about evolution, or bringing in outside organizations that are going to be talking about things that are impacting students. We work with several youth voter rights organizations, so getting out the vote, voter education, voter registration, because we think that's important, and we've seen the religious crackdown on especially youth being able to vote. So it's community service projects. So part of our thing is like, we're in this world for a short time. Let's make it better for ourselves and for other people. So what value are you bringing into your community? And then as well as the activism. So our goals as a national staff is to support the students. And we often say that depending on where you are, like rural or urban, or how much religious predominance is in an area, our student chapters will all look and feel very different. So some of them are just about coming together and creating that safe place. Others are very activisty and making sure that they're doing things. And all of those are okay. And so we're just trying to support them in what they're doing. But the heart of what we're doing is we've got, students all across the country who are organized and doing things supported by their campuses and supported by us.
I think, that's really cool. And what made me think about it was, last night I was talking to my oldest. He's 11 and just started middle school, and was talking to a friend and learned that he was an atheist. Mm-hmm. He told me this last night, and so he was like, do atheists go to hell? And I was like, I don't know. I was like, there's probably some Christians out there that believe that. And I was like, but you want to know what kind of Christians we are? And I told him, we're the kinds of Christians that just treat people like good people. I was like that's all I can tell you at this point, and at your age, just be that kind of Christian. And it struck me because part of his explanation was like, he's the first atheist I know. And I'm like, probably not, but yeah. He's the first atheist that told you he was an atheist, and my son identifies as a Christian, even though he's still kind of working through what that means for him. But, so I think when you mentioned it's a place for people to kind of like meet others from either other faiths or no faiths, I think that's a really important aspect, because if you were raised in a very strict religious upbringing, you probably don't know a whole lot of other non-Christian. So I'd love to just kind of hear if you've got any stories like from students, that you feel comfortable sharing with us.
Yeah. And so I love your answer back to your son. So that's, those are stories we want to hear. And that's a great example of just great values and teaching great values, and just inclusion and openness and, respect for other people. So those are all things we obviously fully support. The interesting thing about, why we're a group of, organization for non-religious students primarily, 80%, we know about 80% of our students come from religious families or religious households. So it's not our goal for deconversion. That's not in our mission, but it is to provide a place for people who are doing that. Because oftentimes especially if you come from a very religious family or a very religious community, in becoming non-religious, you lose oftentimes friends and family who may not want to speak with you and those sorts of things. And we have had students who, a student who we do Ask an Atheist Day. And so we have students table on campus, and you can come and ask them like any question. And you get like, what did you have for breakfast this morning too? Is there hell? We do it online. And so if it's a funny question, we answer back in a funny manner. If it's a serious question, we obviously answer it in a serious manner. So but he's president of the chapter and did a single post on social media about Ask an Atheist Day, and his parents saw it. And they called him up and said, "Hey, you need to renounce that. We're a Christian family. This is not okay." He's like, "I can't. Like, I don't believe in God anymore, and I just don't. I still have my values. I still do things that are important to me, but I just don't believe in a God anymore." And so they were like, "Well, if you don't, we're cutting you off." And so they were paying for his tuition and paying for his apartment, but they said they stopped immediately, and they even tried his car that he was paying for. They tried to take his car away from him because they were, the example of him being non-religious was such a threat to their identity that they wanted to do anything they could. And so he unfortunately had to resign as the president. He's like, "Look, I got to get a second job." He's like, "This isn't changing about me. And so I need to know that I'm finishing my education. So I need to get a job so I have money to pay for tuition next year and to pay for my apartment, and I'm going to be on my own." So we have unfortunate stories like that. And there's one, we have a female student leader who was like, "It was much easier to tell my family that I was a lesbian than it was to tell them that I was an atheist." And we still hear that oftentimes. And I would even say from my own family, it was much easier hearing that I was gay than really, realizing that I no longer believed in a God, and working for this organization that sort of
I know
what its mission was. We unfortunately continue to hear those stories, and the increase in animus were, highly religious organizations acting out against non-religious students on campus, acting out against LGBT folk on campus. We continue to hear more of those stories, which is highly unfortunate. There are lots of positive, stories there where people are supported, and lots of good stories in there, and like we want to make sure that we're there for both of those, for people who need the community, and we're fortunate to have organizations like Recovering from Religion, who is sort of a non-religious helpline, and it can actually connect people to secular-friendly therapists as well. So there's a huge network. So we oftentimes, if students are having specific trouble, we can direct them in those areas as well.
I appreciate you sharing all of that. It's challenging to hear the stories, to hear how people have been treated. I don't I'm thinking to myself, and I'm a pastor, and my children, they come to church, they all believe in God. And, I'm even probably not very pushy, right? Certainly, I think compared to how my parents were, for me, and the kind of environment I was, because I wanted them to make choices and to kind of, to the best of their ability, but also, they're kids. And another thing is, like, I don't know how much a kid is able to really reason these things through in helpful ways without parental involvement, to help, like, certainly as adults, like having to work through your own conviction about something. That's imperative. For an adult to have the faith of their parents is not really a faith. It's not a true faith. It's just it's a tradition. And so in the way that I think about it, like, they would need to have an adult experience with God. They need to work through the kinds of things they would need to, doctrinally and intellectually and all of that. And I think that's super important. And I have some compassion. It's interesting, both for the kid in that situation, because that would just be so horrible to be in a situation where you feel like, I believe my beliefs have shifted, but my parents are punishing me for my belief shifting. Mm-hmm. Right. Even though, like, I don't even know if I necessarily had control, right, about that. I got influenced, or whatever it was that led me to this place where my beliefs have now shifted. And now, you're like rejecting me. And I could absolutely see how that would cause enormous amounts of pain. And I can also understand being a parent now, how if your child said I left or whatever it was,
Yeah.
the kind of pain that would cause you, the kind of turmoil that would cause you, especially if you believed something like if they don't believe, if you truly genuinely believe that they would face something like hell
Right.
if they didn't do this.
Yeah.
So they're acting reasonably and logically within their worldview, even though maybe from the outside looking at it, like we could say, I'm not okay with how they handled that. And I could probably say that in that situation, like that was not a good, like that's like super painful to do that. And it seems like that's just going to drive your son or daughter away from you, not
Even faster.
Absolutely, even faster. So I don't think there's wisdom. I don't think that's, but it's like trying to think through what happens. And in that light, like what advice would you give to both sides, the parents? Because I think that's one of the tensions you face, people coming out of this household. So maybe the household, the person that is facing like the pain of watching someone change their beliefs. And then on the other side, the person rolling through that. What, from your unique perspective, what would be your kind of call to them or challenge to them?
I think for parents, when we should want, and again, working with youth, we should want young people to go on a voyage of discovery and who learn who they are. And to try on, to consider different possibilities and think rationally and question some of the things we've been taught so that they form a solid foundation of their beliefs moving forward. And that's just, I think, just we look at human development and that's an important aspect of that. It's also like, I think, and to your point, I think for parents, and especially if you're very religious and you do think, okay, if you're not religious, you're no longer going to heaven, you're going to hell. And there is a profound paradigm in which those beliefs are built on. Your son or daughter isn't really fundamentally different. They are the person you raise them as. So if you raise them with good moral values, odds are they're keeping all of that as they move forward. So just because it's in sometimes a different religion, sometimes it's in a spiritualistic aspect rather than a religious aspect, and because of a lot of the hypocrisy we've seen between sort of the words and the actions of organized religion, hence why a lot of young people are leaving religion. They may still be religious-ish, but not wanting to participate in that religion because they see how it's treating women or communities of color or the climate or LGBT folk, and those are their friends. So they're wrestling with that. So, I think one, recognize that your son or daughter probably, is still the same person that you raised them at. They're just a different place in where they are and looking at that, and the values they instilled are there, and they're still good people in that. So I think dealing with that, the deep spiritual belief about this is the only way to eternal life, that I think that's the thing that will be their wrestle on that. And I don't have a lot of advice on that one. For young people, I think again, oftentimes for a lot of young people, they think that if they are leaving religion, or they just realize, I don't believe in a God, but this is the way I want to live my life. I think realizing there are lots of people out there that are just like you. And so, thinking we're the only one is oftentimes the most difficult thing. And sometimes in saying that out loud and telling people, you do lose friends and family and community. There are other friends and family, self-designed family, self-chosen family, and community that are out there waiting for you. And so there's a large network of non-churchy, I can't say it, congregational. That word was not coming to me. you know, organizations out there all across the United States that still would give you that sort of a bit of that churchy feel, but without the religion aspect. And there are lots of organizations out there who are, you know, doing community service and doing good things in their community and helping the homeless and you know, doing food drives, all sorts of things, you know, going out on hikes out into the desert and looking at the stars and, you know, just having those questions about what does all this mean and where do we come from and what's really out there. So, you know, doing all of those sorts of things that for you to be involved in. And there still is a rich and vibrant and active community for you to be involved in. And so it's reaching out and people will reach back.
Well, thanks for sharing all that. I really appreciate it. Thanks for coming on here and spending some time with us, Kevin. It's been a real pleasure to have this conversation.
No, I enjoy doing it. It's been a great time speaking with you guys.
Yes, and to our viewers, guys, thanks for joining us. We're going to put links and everything to Kevin Bolling's the organization, Secular Student Alliance. Make sure you go check that out, and we'll put all the links for that in the show notes. So go there, check it out. And guys, make sure you like, subscribe, do that stuff that hacks the algorithm for us. Share this with someone you feel like needs to hear it or would be curious about it. We try to keep this stuff coming for you, really high quality stuff so that you can think about it, talk about it, and hopefully make some changes that are there for you to make. And until next time, guys, keep your conversations not right or left, but up. Thanks. God bless. Hey there, Josh Bertram here, faithful host of the Faithful Politics Podcast. I want to let you know about a compelling new spinoff, the Faith Roundtable, where I'll be interviewing top faith leaders, theologians, and scholars to unpack the pressing issues that are shaping the church in America today. We'll dive into topics like faith in public life, social justice, and how we can engage our communities more effectively. Make sure you don't miss any of our enlightening conversations by subscribing to it on our YouTube channel. Join me at the Faith Roundtable, where deep discussion meets thoughtful insight.